It is the ultimate festival of democracy. Bigger, noisier and more engrossing than anywhere else in the world. Almost 95 crore voters are eligible to vote in the general elections this year. Over 10 lakh booths spread over the length and breadth of a subcontinental-sized country. An Indian election is that one day when all social and economic inequalities just melt away. You can be a billionaire several times over or struggle to get even one proper meal. On voting day, you have an equal power in your single vote. Hello and welcome to this special show where I will rewind through the pages of history to recreate the great Indian election experience as I have seen it. Smile karo mere dost. Elections on my plate, coming to you from Raipur, Agartala, Shillong, the city of pearls. This will be the 10th Lok Sabha election that I will be covering as a journalist. The first was way back in 1989, in what really seems a very long time ago. I was 24, had jet black hair, was working in the Times of India in Mumbai. It was my first full-time job in journalism. It was an exciting election and, dare I say, a significant one.
India is an old country, but a young nation. And like the young everywhere, we are impatient.
The voting age had just been brought down from 21 years to 18. Ushering in an entire new generation of Indians into the polling booths.
हमने मत देने की उम्र कम कर दी थी 21 से 18, जिसमें आपकी युवकों की आवाज पूरे तरह से ऊपर उठे। आगामी होने वाले चुनाव में चिंताओं बताएगा देश के प्रचार से।
The 1989 election is often called the VP Singh election. Vishwanath Pratap Singh was a central figure in that general election. A former congressman taking on the mighty Congress machine led by Rajdeep Gandhi. Amongst the first rallies I covered was of VP Singh in central Mumbai in a Muslim-dominated area of the city. VP was then wildly popular among Muslim voters at the time as he accused the Congress of playing soft Hindu politics.
आज इस हिंदुस्तान को बचाना इस दिलों पे जो है वो लकीरें न पड़े और इसीलिए मैं परसों अयोध्या जा रहा हूं इसलिए जा रहा हूं कि अभी कोई सूरत निकले कोई मेरे मोहब्बत का रास्ता तो निकले.
And yet when the results threw up a hung parliament, VP did not hesitate to take the outside support of the BJP to form a government.
मैं विश्वनाथ प्रताप सिंह
सत्यनिष्ठा से प्रतिज्ञा करता हूँ कि विधि द्वारा स्थापित भारत के संविधान के प्रति
मैं विधि द्वारा स्थापित भारत के संविधान के प्रति
It was to prove a game changer as it catapulted the BJP onto the national center stage. While I was in Mumbai covering the election, all the post-election excitement was in New Delhi. The Janata Dal, a collection of many anti-Congress parties, had three main PM aspirants. The middle-class hero VP Singh, the former Young Turk and socialist Chandrasekhar, and the Jat farmer leader Devi Lal.
Do you contest or is it going to be unanimous?
After a few minutes you'll know.
The political potboiler in Delhi had all the ingredients that make for a Bollywood thriller. Many journalists and political players from that period have written how VP and his supporters outsmarted Chandrasekhar, who bowed out after he was assured Devi Lal would become the Prime Minister and not his great rival VP Singh. But unknown to Chandrasekhar, a deal outside the deal was being reached. At the Janata Dal legislature party meeting that year, Devi Lal's name was proposed by VP. Chandrasekhar seconded the proposal, as was the agreement. But then came the twist in the tale. Devi Lal suddenly stood up, profusely thanking everyone, but then graciously opting out, proposing VP instead for Prime Minister, leaving Chandrasekhar shell-shocked. How is that for a twist in Indian politics?
The decision was taken to choose Devi Lal. VP Singh to propose, myself to second. It was altered at the last moment without my knowledge, without consent, without information. I don't know. You ask those questions.
Chandrasekhar, of course, had his revenge in less than 1 year when he replaced VP Singh as Prime Minister.
Well, I mean that in the opposition, there are leaders who are certainly more capable than me, more experienced than me, who have got, whose sacrifices are more longer public life. When you think about your country, the best should be available to it.
मैं जनता पार्टी के नेताओं का और उन सभी साथियों का अत्यंत आभारी हूं जिन्होंने इस महान उत्तरदायित्व के पद पर मुझे चुना है.
But that 1 year period that VP was in power, the forces of Mandal and Mandir were unleashed.
VP Singh had no mind in implementing what was recommended in Mandal Commission. VP Singh only wanted to use it as a political instrument to beat Devi Lal.
एक समस्या और बड़ी समस्या जिसका जिक्र मैंने पहले दिन भी किया था, राम जन्मभूमि और बाबरी मस्जिद का आया
कहते हैं कि आप अदालत का फैसला क्यों नहीं मानते? अदालत क्या इस बात का फैसला करेगी कि यहां पर राम का जन्म हुआ था कि नहीं हुआ था? आपसे तो इतनी आशा है, बीच में मत पड़ो, रास्ते में मत आओ, क्योंकि ये जो रथ है, लोक रथ है, जनता का रथ है, जो सोमनाथ से चला है और जिसने मन में संकल्प किया हुआ है कि 30 अक्टूबर को वहां पर पहुंच करके कार सेवा करेंगे और मंदिर वहीं बनाएंगे, उसको कौन रोकेगा? कौन सी सरकार रोकने वाली है?
भगवान राम का जन्म इसी अयोध्या में हुआ, इसी सरयू के तट के ऊपर हुआ.
Effects of which the Indian political landscape is still influenced by.
ठीक है क्या है ठीक 508 मोहम्मद ताहिर 577 किशन कुमार हाँ यहाँ साइन कीजिए
बाबूजी को पूछिए
The first few elections I covered were all in the pre-electronic voting era. Remember, EVMs covered every Lok Sabha constituency only in 2004. Before that, it was ballot paper and ballot boxes that were the order of the day. Interestingly, in 1952, the first election in independent India, there were separate colored ballot boxes for each candidate. You stamped your vote for a candidate on ballot paper and then put it in a ballot box of your choice. Ballot boxes in that first election were moved across the country on camels, on horseback, the entire exercise stretching across several months. Himachal Pradesh, for example, voted in October 1951. The remaining states much later in 1952. Godrej and Boyce manufactured the ballot boxes for that first election. The company archives say 12.83 lakh ballot boxes were produced in their Vikhroli factory in Mumbai in barely 4 months. The ballot papers for the election were printed at the Government of India Security Press in Nashik. The entire exercise was executed by a new body, the Election Commission, and it was headed by a remarkable institution builder, Sukumar Sen. A brilliant ICS officer, he was appointed as Chief Secretary of West Bengal in 1947 before being sent on deputation as Chief Election Commissioner. Sen didn't have an easy task ahead of him. Around 17.6 crore Indians were eligible to vote in that first election, more than 85% of whom could not read or write. To make it easier, each political party was then assigned a symbol. Since these voters could not read or write, they could at least vote for the party of their choice through symbols. It's a system that we still follow. In the US, women, that too only white women initially, got the right to vote only in 1920, more than a century after the first presidential election in that country.
With the party symbols allotted, the stage was set for the great experiment. Into the arena they stepped, candidates of every shade of political opinion.
In India, from the very first election, every adult Indian across gender, caste, region and community got the right to vote from the very first post-independence general election of 1952. In the 1962 Lok Sabha elections, for which the Election Commission for the first time presented separate numbers for male and female voter turnout, women constituted a measly 46.7%. But by 2019, women voter turnout had shot up exponentially, up by nearly 20% to 67.18%. During the same period, male turnout also grew, but by only 5%. From 62.1% in 1962 to 67.08% in 2019. Women were actually now polling more in some parts of the country than men. The differential growth rate in voter turnout has resulted in a watershed moment in India's electoral history. In 2019, for the first time, women's turnout percentage in Lok Sabha elections was actually marginally higher than that of the men. Women power, or the power of 49, was well and truly here. Now, the ballot paper system of the early elections had its pitfalls. It could lead to what was known as booth capturing. Where criminals would actually take over a booth and stamp ballot papers freely. Bihar, for example, was notorious for this in the 1970s and 80s.
हम वोट देने जा रहे थे, हमरा से बैलेट पेपर लेके अब हार दीस, अब हार के आई ही मारी से।
वो है ना खोलने के तो हम वोट ढूंढ
एजेंट लोग से पूछिए, हम लोग को मत कहिए कि ये टंगले हैं या फंगले हैं।
हम लोग वहाँ पर जाते बूथ पर तो लोग गोली बंदूक निकाल करके हम लोग कुछ प्रेशर डाल करके हम लोग को भगा देते। इसी कारण से हम लोग पहले ही वहाँ से हट चुके।
जो करीब 125-30 के लगभग वोट बाकी रह गया था, तो इसी बीच में मैंने मारपीट जब हो गया शुरू, तो ये लोग जो अधिकारी लोग थे जो बक्सा अपना बंद कर करके और ले करके चले गए।
However, it wasn't a cakewalk all along. The years between 1970 and 1991 were particularly troublesome for electioneering. Election violence had become quite the norm in some parts of the country. Instances of murder, looting, kidnapping, and booth capturing were rampant in several places. Voter bribery and black money had become widespread.
Main issue is who can keep the country together, who has the guts and the will to fight terrorism, who is principled enough to fight communalism, and who can give a stable government.
I, Rajdeep Gandhi,
do solemnly affirm that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of India.
The 1991 Lok Sabha election that I covered will be remembered as the Rajiv Gandhi assassination election. The tragic assassination of Mr. Gandhi took place while he was campaigning in Sri Perumbadur in Tamil Nadu, slap bang in the middle of the general elections. A pause button was pressed for a few days. And the electoral process got elongated. The assassination changed security protocols. VVIP candidates would now be encircled by high security teams. Where once door-to-door campaigning was the norm, the physical distance between candidate and voters widened over time. The 1991 elections came at a crucial juncture. It wasn't widely known to voters at the time, but India was on the brink of an economic catastrophe. The elections gave a hung verdict once again. The Congress was the largest party with 244 seats, less than that 272 magic halfway mark, but just about enough to form a minority government. The mixed verdict threw up a rather intriguing figure as Prime Minister. Veteran Congressman P.V. Narasimha Rao, who had packed his bags and was preparing to retire to his native Andhra Pradesh, suddenly got a new lease of life.
मैं P.V. Narasimha Rao ईश्वर की शपथ लेता हूँगी ईश्वर की शपथ लेता हूँ कि
As Prime Minister, Rao would unleash economic reforms that transformed India.
हमारा लक्ष्य है भारत को आत्मनिर्भर बनाना। ये आत्मनिर्भरता कोई कोरा नारा नहीं है। इसका अर्थ यही है कि निर्यात से आय कमाइए और उसी कमाई से आयात की ज़रूरत पूरी करिए। हम दान नहीं चाहते किसी से, हम व्यापार चाहते हैं।
Some of the biggest reforms in Indian elections came about in the mid-1990s. That's when the Election Commission acquired a face and more authority under the stewardship of the Chief Election Commissioner T.N. Seshan.
The conditions have changed for the better.
The stern-looking Seshan, armed with a sharp tongue and a short temper, put fear in the minds of candidates and parties.
Peace, fairness, free, violence-free elections, my colleagues have referred to, and we shall try to make this as good an exercise as possible, better than the best.
Suddenly, the Election Commission was closely monitoring election expenditure, making it that much more difficult for candidates to splurge.
We have now tried to clamp at the expenditure end of it. So we have some quaint old laws. There is a section in the Indian Penal Code enacted in 1919 by which if I spend money for your election without your approval, I can be punished. We are using that now. The result is obvious on the roads. We have put videography throughout the country to watch opulent expenditure. We have appointed income tax commissioners as expenditure observers who go around. We could lay down that each candidate must keep his accounts as elaborately. We are prescribed to register with 37 headings under which every day the candidate has to keep his expenses.
The length of the campaign too was cut down. Remember, in 1952, the first election lasted 4 months and spread over 68 polling days. Now, elections last just over a month across 6 to 7 phases during general elections.
Indian elections are damaged by a number of unfortunate things, some of it curable but not being cured, some of it is incurable.
Seshan's clampdown meant that some of the traditional colour went out of an election campaign. Fewer posters and hoardings dot the skyline now than they did in a previous era. Under Seshan, the institution of the Election Commission emerged from the shadows and took a more powerful avatar.
If you don't know how else to select your candidate, select him on the same basis on which you would select a son-in-law to marry your daughter or your sister. Make sure that the khandan is good, the family is good. Make sure that the individual is good.
Seshan became a nightmare for politicians and, dare I say, even us in the media.
Everybody used to address me as Chief Election Commissioner, Government of India. Does it make a lot of difference that I am not the Chief Election Commissioner of the Government of India, but I am the Chief Election Commissioner of India? That's a very minor change in emphasis, but it's a major difference. That I am not part of the government. Who are you answerable to? Certainly I am answerable to the President. Certainly I am answerable to the people. Certainly I am answerable to Parliament in the larger sense. I am answerable to the courts for any wrong which I may do.
I distinctly remember we were once preparing for an exit poll on television in 1995 for a Gujarat Assembly election. Just hours before the telecast, a fuming Seshan ordered the telecast to be called off. I will not allow the exit poll because it violates the rules, he insisted. Seshan once famously said, "I eat politicians for breakfast," kicking off a huge row. The model code of conduct, as we know today, was forcefully implemented on the ground by Seshan. He also introduced voter identity cards to weed out impersonators and fake voters.
The voters' rolls are not as good as they should be. Recently, when we gave identity cards throughout the country, we established that the rolls were about 96% correct. 4% was wrong. It was not 96% correct which bothered or which made you happy or unhappy. The 4% was not. There were people who were dead whose names were still on people who had moved on to some other part of the country or even the world or part of the city whose names were still in the wrong address.
In the mid-1990s, the government of the day expanded the Election Commission, inducting 2 more election commissioners. Decisions were now to be taken by majority, and the Chief Election Commissioner had no veto power. It was seen as a move to clip Seshan's wings.
If you want me in a job which is other than philosophical, it will be only in a job where there is enough power to change things.
What might that job be?
As far as I can see, if it is not again impertinent, there are only 2 jobs. The Prime Minister's job for obvious reasons and the President's job for hidden reasons.
After retirement, he remained active. Seshan contested a parliament election and a presidential election. But guess what? He lost both. The 1996 election was an interesting personal experience for me. The first Lok Sabha election counting that I covered for television. Now remember, in the ballot paper days, counting was done manually and would often last 3 to 4 days. So the television coverage went on for at least 72 hours live on Doordarshan, with breaks in between when Hindi pictures and songs would be screened. Viewers from those days will fondly remember how they got to watch movies like Shatranj Ke Khiladi, Diwar late in the evening, with hourly election updates through the night. Those days there would be huge screens outside newspaper offices in cities where one could see people gathered to get the latest results. Now, of course, counting days like a T20 match, over in just a few hours. A big reason for this is the move away from ballot paper to EVMs, or electronic voting machines. First conceived in 1977, a prototype was developed in 1979. The EVMs were first used in 1982 in a by-election to the North Paravur Assembly constituency in Kerala. But the Supreme Court struck it down as there was no specific law prescribing the use of EVMs. In 1989, Parliament amended the Representation of the People's Act to create a provision for the use of EVMs. Finally, these were used in 25 legislative assembly constituencies spread across 3 states of Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan and Delhi in 1998. Over the next few years, the use of EVMs would be gradually increased. For the first time in May 2001, the state assembly elections in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Puducherry and West Bengal were held entirely using EVMs. And then in 2004, EVMs were finally used in all 543 parliamentary constituencies in the country in that year's Lok Sabha election. I know EVMs have their critics today, but I am not convinced that a return to the ballot paper is a solution either. EVMs with extensive use of VVPATs or a voter verifiable paper audit trail is still perhaps the best way forward. The 1990s was a dream decade for journalists covering elections. 4 general elections in the space of a decade, the most ever, and guess what? As many as 5 prime ministers. The instability caused by frequent elections was a reflection of the growing fragmentation of Indian politics. By the late 1990s, the dominance of the Congress was over. The BJP was a rising force. But also rising were regional and caste-based parties. As a result, elections were becoming far more competitive and would often throw up unclear verdicts and coalition governments. Between 1989 and 2014, for 25 long years, no single party won a majority in a Lok Sabha election. The first election in 1952 had 1,074 candidates. In 2019, there were as many as 8,039 candidates, a clear sign of greater competition. In the 1952 elections, 53 parties were in the fray. In 2019, 657 parties had entered the ring. I was in high school in 1977, reading the papers excitedly when the mighty Indira Gandhi was defeated 2 years after she had put democracy on hold by declaring a national emergency.
मैं आपको ये विश्वास दिलाना चाहती हूँ कि इस नए आपातकाल की घोषणा से कानून प्रिय नागरिकों के अधिकारों पर किसी प्रकार से असर नहीं पड़ेगा। मुझे विश्वास है कि आंतरिक स्थिति में तेजी से सुधार होगा, जिससे हम जल्द से जल्द इस घोषणा को समाप्त कर सकेंगे।
The defeat of Indira by a hurriedly assembled coalition of opposition parties led by an equally hurriedly formed Janata Party must rank as one of the biggest upsets in Indian electoral history.
जब इमरजेंसी खत्म हुई और चुनाव हो गए तो उसके बाद हमारी और इंदिरा जी की पहली मुलाकात हुई। जब इंदिरा जी चुनाव हार गई थी तो मैंने उनसे सवाल पूछा कि आप इस सद पर कैसे चली गई। तो उनका उत्तर आज भी मुझे, चंद्रशेखर जी, मेरे मन में लोगों ने बहुत गलतफहमियां पैदा कर दी थी। मुझसे बोलो, देश के गौरव के साथ वो कभी समझौता करने वाली महिला नहीं थी। The only weakness I could see in her was a tendency of concentrating all powers to herself. In a way, she was a power-eccentric person.
It was an election result that gave us our oldest Prime Minister in veteran Gandhian Morarji Desai, who became Prime Minister at the age of 81. In 2004, though, is not far behind in terms of a shock result.
सत्ता का खेल तो चलेगा, सरकारें आएंगी, जाएंगी, पार्टियां बनेगी, बिगड़ेंगी, मगर ये देश रहना चाहिए, इस देश का लोकतंत्र अमर रहना चाहिए।
This was the year Atal Bihari Vajpayee lost when everyone expected him to win.
हम अपने देश की सेवा के कार्य में जुटे रहेंगे। हम संख्या बल के सामने सर झुकाते हैं और आपको विश्वास दिलाते हैं कि जो कार्य हमने अपने हाथ में लिया है, वो जब तक राष्ट्रीय उद्देश्य पूरा नहीं कर लेंगे, तब तक विश्राम से नहीं बैठेंगे, तब तक आराम से नहीं बैठेंगे। अध्यक्ष महोदय, मैं अपना त्यागपत्र राष्ट्रपति महोदय को देने जा रहा हूँ।
It wasn't the only twist in the tale. I vividly remember the crowds that gathered outside then Congress President Sonia Gandhi's house, eagerly waiting for her to take over as Prime Minister.
It is an endorsement of the Congress Party, of all the workers, of the grassroots workers, from the lowest worker to the top.
The mandate of the people of India was to make Srimati Sonia Gandhi as the Prime Minister. We have spent hours and days persuading her to accept the verdict of the people.
But then unexpectedly, Sonia Gandhi declined the Prime Minister's post, claiming that she was listening to her inner voice.
आज मेरी अंतरात्मा मुझसे कह रही है कि मैं विनम्रता के साथ ये पद स्वीकार करने से मना कर दूं।
Dramatic scenes followed as one Congress leader after another took the microphone and implored Sonia Gandhi to take back the decision. She stuck by her choice.
but for reasons which have been spelled out by her in her statement, she felt that in the best interest of the country, she would like that burden to be passed on to me. I know my limitations, but with Madam's guidance and the support of the country, I am sure we are going to make the future happen.
Dr. Manmohan Singh instead became the accidental Prime Minister. The first time someone who had never won a direct election would become India's Prime Minister.
I, Manmohan Singh, do swear in the name of God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of India as by law established, that I will uphold the sovereignty and integrity of India.
By 2014, the election wheel was turning once again.
संसदीय दल ने यह फैसला किया है कि श्री नरेंद्र मोदी को आगामी लोकसभा चुनाव के लिए प्राइम मिनिस्ट्रियल कैंडिडेट के रूप में प्रोजेक्ट किया जाए।
आज यहां से जुगल बनना चाहिए, गांधी मैदान से जुगल बजना चाहिए। कांग्रेस मुक्त भारत का सपना हिंदुस्तान साकार।
This time, the rise of Narendra Modi made it an election that changed India. The BJP winning a majority on its own for the first time.
मैं आप सबका बहुत आभारी हूं कि आपने सर्वसम्मति से मुझे एक नया दायित्व दिया है। मैं विशेष रूप से आडवाणी जी, राजनाथ जी का भी आभारी हूं कि उन्होंने मुझे आशीर्वाद भी दिए हैं। मैं सोच रहा था कि अटल जी का स्वास्थ्य अच्छा होता और आज वो यहां होते तो सोने में सुहागा होता।
If in the 1990s elections were fought in the age of government-sponsored Doordarshan, now they were being fought in the gaze of scores of 24/7 private news channels. Mr. Modi is a made-for-TV political figure, someone who recognizes the importance of branding and marketing an image, which is why, riding on a promise of hope and change, using 3D screens and spectacular roadshows, Mr. Modi combined modern technology with old-style campaigning to win a famous victory.
जो काम 50, 55, 60 के कालखंड में होना चाहिए था, वो मुझे 2014 से 19 के बीच में करना पड़ा है।
Mr. Modi won again in 2019, a general election that was fought against the backdrop of a terror attack in Kashmir and a tough Indian response to Pakistan.
मैं आतंकी संगठनों को और उनके सरपरस्तों को कहना चाहता हूं कि वे बहुत बड़ी गलती कर चुके हैं। बहुत बड़ी कीमत उनको चुकानी पड़ेगी।
This time, Mr. Modi was positioned as a muscular nationalist hero, a narrative that was amplified on social media and WhatsApp in particular, now active players in Indian elections.
अरे मोदी है तो मुमकिन है, अरे मोदी है तो मुमकिन है, अरे मोदी है तो मुमकिन है, ओ अरे मोदी है तो मुमकिन है.
Well, in 2024, Mr. Modi is back, hoping to do a hat-trick and become the first Prime Minister since Jawaharlal Nehru to win 3 consecutive elections.
पूरा देश कह रहा है अब की बार, खड़गे जी भी कह रहे हैं.
Now, in the 35 years that I have covered Indian elections, Prime Ministers have come and gone. If I wrote a copy in the first election in 1989 on a typewriter, today I could relay a live broadcast on a mobile phone in real time. If a notepad was my companion then, a mic is my ally now. And while the use of muscle power in elections is less visible, money power still calls the shots. In 1952, it is estimated that the election cost the country around just 10 crores. In 2019, the figure went up to 60,000 crores and more. A candidate's limit ranges from 75 lakhs to 90 lakhs for a general election. But in reality, candidates spend in crores to fight an election. And yet, some things haven't changed. One such unchanging element is the use of indelible ink. The purple-colored ink on your finger after you vote is made of silver nitrate and was developed by the National Physical Laboratories in 1962 and has been used ever since. I remember once covering a Mumbai municipal election where there were serious allegations that the ink was coming off. A protest was lodged, but thankfully such cases have been few and far between. The ink on your finger has stood the test of time. Over the years, what has also stood out for me and stood the test of time is the sheer enthusiasm and resilience of the Indian voter. We may be cynical of our politicians and their promises, but the fact is more people now vote than ever before in Indian elections. The first election had 17.6 crore registered voters. The 2019 Lok Sabha election had over 90 crore registered voters. And that number will climb up to around 96 crores this time. Voter turnout in 1952 was just 45%. It's well over 67% in the Lok Sabha elections of 2019. In the first general elections, 90% of the electorate was from rural India. According to the 2011 census data, 37% of India now lives in cities and towns. As literacy spreads to every nook and corner, so has voter education. Yes, there are caste and community vote banks. Yes, there is an excess use of money power. Yes, people with criminal records still contest elections. And yes, there is probably no level playing field between political parties. But there are masses out there, millions and millions of Indians who still have faith in the power of their vote. From the icy climes of Ladakh to the beaches of Kerala, from islands in the Bay of Bengal to the desert sands of Rajasthan, elections unite India like little else. And long may that continue. Jai Hind, Namaskar.